I think that you need to learn to be yourself, and yourself as an individual people will notice. I just fought the battle inside the BBC that said you can't get rid of children in need. And we had to show them that actually the demographics of children in need were a demographic that the BBC doesn't normally reach. Throughout my career, I've known that it's the telling of the story, almost more than the story itself, that is going to change minds.
Welcome to the Early Insights podcast, an opportunity to understand exactly what it takes to build a career in the data, research and insight sector, and the many different ways to do so. I'm your host, Lewis Reeves, founder and CEO at Walr, and today we have an extremely important guest. Having built an illustrious career driving the development of brand and marketing at some of the world's largest organisations, she now has one of the most influential roles in our industry as CEO of the Market Research Society. A big warm welcome, Jane Frost.
Thank you very much.
So Jane, we're here today to learn all about your career and how you've ended up leading the charge of the market research world. I want to start around how your career got going and going back to your early days. You're coming out of school, you're thinking about what you do next, and you decide to go to university, and not just any university, you decide to go and read history at Cambridge. Can you take me through that thought process and what options were, whether that was a really obvious path for you or whether it was a tricky decision?
Yes, it's an interesting time for people. I think they frequently don't get a lot of lateral advice, and so they tend to go in directions that they see their parents go or their school suggests. But my early career at school was going around the country following my father's business, and I always end up in the middle of everyone having made friends and everything like that. So I was always a bit of a sort of sore thumb. And when I ended up in my last school, which was all girls, and I couldn't speak like that either. My father was the only industrialist in a bunch of farmers and solicitors and accountants. It was a very posh East Riding school. It's a grammar school, it wasn't paid for, but I was always annoying people, and particularly always annoying my headmistress, who actually I think loathed me. I began to enjoy being loathed, but she always thought that I would never amount to anything. So that really didn't allow a lot of sort of suggestion that maybe marketing industry would be a great thing to do. So I founded the Industry Society at the school, which was really bad because it had boys in it, and I got told off for that. When I came to think about universities, it was my father. He always believed that I could do more, better and brighter and should never limit myself. And he actually found what was then Newhall, Cambridge, which was a college where you didn't take the standard exams because my school didn't do that sort of thing. You had to answer a 4-hour general paper. And so I wrote those essays as an opinionated 18-year-old and much to my surprise got in. But in the meantime, because you can't rely on getting into Cambridge, that we had 4 other choices. Now, everyone in those days knew what you'd put on your list. So the second knew what the first was and the bottom knew. So, but the challenge for my father was there's 20 quid for each university you get into, despite the fact you put Cambridge first. And I think it taught me about marketing because as I went to Manchester, they said, well, we're not going to make you an offer because you've got down for Cambridge and you won't come. And I said, well, I'm really sorry about that because, you don't know that I'm going to go to Cambridge and you're ruling yourself out of my consideration. And they rang me back and said, well, you've got into Cambridge, so we're not going to make you an offer. I said, stick by what I said, I haven't. And so they made me the offer. I got my 20 quid. And Newcastle was at the bottom of the list, not because it's an awful place. I really wanted to go there in some ways. It's modern, it's vibrant, it's edgy, it's industrial. But I had to think, why, when they asked me, you've put us 5th and last, what was my answer going to be? And so I'd worked out the answer to that, and that was my 5th lot of 20 quid that came into the bank. This may sound an odd set of responses to you, but I think it framed my understanding that I have to think about what response I want people to have to me and whatever I do. What is marketing like? Although I didn't know it was marketing at the time. And also reflects the fact that if you give me a challenge, I will take a challenge.
Yes. Makes a lot of sense. And I think actually a number of the questions that I had flowing into how a history degree turns into a marketing career has become very clear now, both the influence of your father and your desire to gain some commercial benefit to that. But touch on very quickly, so you went and read history.
Medieval history, very useful.
With some extra money in your pocket. How did that play out in your later career in marketing? Were there any similarities and learnings that you were able to utilize?
Yeah, that was always the first question everyone asked, what good is history in a marketing career? So in medieval history, you don't have a lot of data, and you have to string together what you do in a coherent argument to convince your professor. And I think marketing is that a lot of the time too. It's about actually making a coherent argument with the data you possess in a way that influences people. And throughout my career, I've known that it's the telling of the story, almost more than the story itself, that is going to change minds and change opinions.
Yeah, it really, really interesting. So you're leaving university, you're going into Unilever. Already I can see a lot of what's created this. You've got ringing in your ear, the head teacher that thought you shouldn't be going in this direction, which is why you become one of the very first ever female brand managers within Unilever, and you've got your dad teaching you how to be a good marketer and salesperson. Early days at Unilever, you go and win a Cannes Lion pretty early on. Tell us a bit about it.
Well, I've always been lucky. Let me be quite clear about this. A lot of what has happened to me is luck. I think it's about what you do with your luck. And so I had the brand was Persil. And in those days, I mean, this is such bad marketing for Unilever. They were focusing on a type of Persil Automatic, not the core Persil. Persil could be hand wash, Persil could be many things, but they were just doing, if you like, channel marketing. And so the core brand was starting to die off because nobody was talking about the core brand values of Persil. And I went to the board with my annual budget proposal and started with a picture basically of the 4 stars, cash cow, starving star, and all that sort of thing, the 4 quadrants, and just put up a picture which had me as a milkmaid and a dying cow, and said, essentially, this is Persil if you don't do anything about it. I want £250,000, please, and I will prove to you that I can advertise Persil in a way that it benefits everything else. Went to J. Walter Thompson with a brief that says, this is about the core Persil image. You don't have much money, because £250,000 with media is not much. And we invented the Persil posters, which didn't even have a pack on it, just said Persil. And I tell you the one thing, again, this is about storytelling. The chair who had actually agreed my budget, I made sure I knew what his route to work was, and the 76-sheet posters were put up in profusion. He said, that is a really hard-hitting campaign, Ray. He didn't know that I'd actually just fixed that.
You've been targeting him. Yeah, fantastic. Amazing. And Joan, what I'm interested to unpack, you go from Unilever to Shell to BBC. You have incredibly successful stints at each of these businesses. What were the pivotal moments to decide, okay, my work is done here, I'd like to move on to my next role and take on a next challenge? What sort of things come to you?
Mostly that was somebody ringing me up and saying, would you like a job? I would say I probably made the mistake in a lot of places of staying too long.
Okay.
Because I was always determined that I was going to win. In Shell, it was going to be the brand is going to be regarded by the main board as a key asset. In the BBC, it was the brand is underplayed, we're going to make it important to the BBC. In Justice, it was we're going to make them think about the people, not just the processes. And I sometimes stay too long, and I would really give this piece of advice to a lot of people. You can be very loyal to the people working with you, and if you do that, you can be very bad to yourself, because you can stay there until they're okay. Because every organisation I've been in has sort of random reorganisations. You know, they invite one of the big consultancies in, and they mess up everything, and they mess up all your carefully built relationships, and you have to reinvent everything again. It gets boring after a while. So you need to decide when these things happen whether it's going to be the place you want to be further down the line. So those are the two things that tend to happen. Either somebody rings me up, or that's one reorganisation too far.
Indeed. And one thing I'd love to draw out, you clearly work for some really successful corporations and also some public service organisations. Talk to us about some of the differences that you experience, particularly through the lens of marketing, between those different types of businesses.
Well, I think this is a good lesson to all market researchers, is that most people who are doing marketing don't call it marketing. So they are actually doing it, and they may be doing it quite well, but they're actually not doing it sustainably because they've not got a way of doing it sustainably. So I think we should always be slightly humble and realise that marketers certainly do not have all the answers. And I do think that you've got to find a framework for the people you're working with so that they understand your language. It's your job to translate. It's your job to point out where they can be heroes themselves. Making heroes of other people is always a good idea. But it's also, this is the ROI you will get from it. So you'll get the emotional value from this weirdo with a skirt that's come in, and you also can actually prove to the CFO there's a financial value as well. But sometimes being the weirdo in a skirt helps, because you can't help but stand out. Sometimes it's incredibly tedious, and I don't think I have ever had an organisation that hasn't discriminated against me, apart from MRS, actually.
And we'd love to touch on that a little bit, and I think that big part of your legacy can be the work that's been done there. In more recent years, your career pivoted away from roles leading departments and organizations into a lot more non-executive work, and would love to understand that transition, and maybe, because I think it's such an amazing British staple, children in need, and your stint there, and just talk to us about some of the challenges that you came through and your successes during that time.
Well, thank you. It's always nice to think about one's successes. It beats thinking about one's failures hugely. I think some of my big successes through my career you wouldn't notice, in the sense that making Shell acknowledge they had a brand and use the brand logo even on transport, because their view is, don't put it on transport if you have an accident. They'll know it was Shell. And my view was, if you put the logo on, you will think seriously about having that accident. The biggest piece of success, which was visible, was a thing called Perfect Day, which we made actually to advertise the BBC. And probably my shortest brief to anyone. And it was basically, surprise me. I think that was a brief. And they did, the agency did, and it was so wonderful, but you have to stick with them. And we had this thing, and I just fought the battle inside the BBC that said you can't get rid of children in need, because they wanted to. They thought it was down market. They thought, it wasn't really fitting the programme profile of the BBC. And we had to show them that, and this is where great market research comes in, that actually the demographics of children in need were a demographic that the BBC doesn't normally reach, and therefore they ought to keep it within their portfolio. But it was still sort of down there as something you wouldn't talk about certainly on Radio 4, get the Perfect Day and think, we can sell this. children in need. We can do this. Rang BBC Worldwide, because I am the corporate person, and said, you can surely do us a record deal on this. And they sort of went, we can do K-Tel. Gathered the team together and said, surely someone's got a boyfriend in the music business. Found Chrysalis, and they did it for free. Fantastic. So that was £2.7 million went into the children in need coffers, the biggest by then by far. But it was really wonderful watching the power of the brand at that stage, because everybody did it for 50 quid.
Yeah.
Elton John, 50 quid. You know, and the BBC Symphony Orchestra was the most difficult, but still 50 quid. Tammy Wynette drove a Winnebago all across America to New York to record it, 50 quid.
Yeah.
And then they all signed over their royalties.
Amazing.
Which is marvellous. But suddenly, Children in Need was cool, because it had this cool thing that everyone, you know, the producer would ring me up and say, can I have a perfect day for this, please? Can I have a perfect day? So you did begin to understand also that external branding is the best internal communications as well. And that was a learning I took forward. And it seemed to me that once you become successful, once you've learnt a lot, then you can help charities and other organisations.
Yeah.
And that I always talked about the people I mentor is, why do you want to be successful? Maybe just because success is fun, but it's rather lonely.
Yeah.
Actually, I wanted to be successful because I could do the fun stuff like helping other people.
Yeah.
I could do the mentoring. I could do the children in need as a board director for 18 years or something like that. And that was trying to make them do things like animate Pudsey. I'm going to do this to animate Pudsey. Now they've animated Pudsey. And then do weird and wonderful things, like my line manager in Revenue and Customs said, oh, Jane, I'm dealing with the Church of England, and they don't seem to want to know what their brand website should do. Can they come and talk to you? And so, you know, you have the fun of 3 hours talking to the Church of England about one website cannot bring people to God, surely to goodness, you know. And talking to smaller charities who just wanted a little bit of help and direction. And then to places like Fair Trade. And Fair Trade is a great brand.
Yeah.
And it's a great idea. You know, make things better by doing what you normally do. What can beat that? So I went into Fair Trade, but you see, you learn. And in Fair Trade, I suddenly became chair, because my chair had to recuse himself because we were in a big argument with Sainsbury's. And I learnt that you have to stand your ground. But I also took my learning out of the civil service, which is always have a witness when you're in an argument with a CEO. And always know your governance. Now, governance, they're dull. It's amazing how many times you can win by knowing your governance. And I talked to Mike Coop, and I could talk about it being Mike Coop because he did that awful thing about Asda that finally lost him the job. I don't know if you remember, he was on Sky singing We're in the Money, and he didn't realise the camera was on him. And this guy looked at me and said, I am going to ring the Daily Mail and accuse you, Fair Trade, of gun running, drug smuggling, people trafficking. And I looked at him and said, I'm afraid you now have to give me all your evidence. Why? Because you've made an accusation. I am required by the Charity Commission to report it to the Charity Commission and to the Metropolitan Police. And he went, oh, I may have been being illustrative. So, you know, it's remarkable where you find the weapons that help you. And nobody should ever knowing the finance, preferably knowing a little bit about audit, and certainly knowing governance, because always there'll be a way you can deploy them.
Yeah, incredible. Jane, you're such a leader from the front, so determined. Did you ever find it challenging in non-executive roles to solely give advice and not pick up, you know, the Olympics going on at the moment, the baton yourself and charge from the front? Was that a difficult transition in some of those roles?
Not really, in the sense that I knew what my role was.
Okay.
I think the difficulty becomes actually the organisation itself knows you should just be non-executive, but really wants you to do something.
Yes.
And the slight discomfort of how do I prove I've helped? So yes, I mean, I always normally come in as a marketing expert, communications expert, and you do find that not the marketing director isn't always wanting you around. So you do have to work very hard to be useful,
Yeah.
but not directive.
Fantastic. So we're going to change gears a little bit and we're going to start talking about the MRS, the Market Research Society. Would love to know a bit about your relationship prior to the role, how the role came about with you as CEO, and then we'll get into what you've done since.
Thank you. Yeah, I got a call. Somebody said they need a CEO at MRS. We think you'd be great. And I just gone through a reorganisation in HMRC, so it all fits. Actually, I hadn't met them at all except peripherally,
Yeah.
and I am throughout my career, a great deployer of market research, particularly stuff that people aren't expecting you to have. So creating a net value for the BBC, for example, which wasn't based on share. Very useful for talking to the then Tory government. Always showing your exco exactly what share they do have.
Yeah.
When they thought they were market leader, no, you're not. I'm really sorry. You've got to do something about this. And in government, some really amazing qualitative work to prove to justice ministers that this isn't just a dry legal business. This impacts people's lives. So market research has always been possibly the major weapon to deploy. And I knew some individually amazing market researchers. Slightly disappointingly, I didn't know their companies because they didn't actually spend time maintaining the relationship, unlike the ad agencies. So I'd met them in I think probably only two occasions. One was in justice when my head of research said he wouldn't do something because it would be against the MRS rules. I didn't know that from Adam, but I dutifully went to the minister and said, I'm sorry, we can't go there. It's against the professional regulations. And this was Harriet Howman. Be fair, she said, right, well, we're not going there then, which was wonderful. And so it is useful to have quality rules. And the second was I made, I think, a very poor speech about the segmentation work we've done at HMRC. But I have to say, the organisation of that conference was not something that animated me particularly. And so when somebody said, would you think about doing this? Would you put your name in the ring? I thought, actually, this is a group of people who do the most wonderful stuff and they sell themselves really badly. I think my challenge might be, how can I get them to sell themselves better? And so that was what I set myself as a challenge going in and talking to the board in my interviews. I do believe that you're better at a job if you're passionate about it.
Yeah.
I was passionate about Purcell, deeply committed to the BBC, really wanted to make changes for consumers in HMRC. And here, what I wanted to do is to try and help the sector have confidence in itself and actually go and do a bit of shouting and make people aware of the value. And I think we're getting better.
I absolutely agree. I think, interestingly, the start of my career in the sector aligns with you taking over the MRS, and certainly back then in turn of the decade, market research was seen as clipboards on street corners, and I think we're evolving. I think that this movement of technology, it helps us to see data science and AI and how data drives successful organizations. The boom of technology plays in with that direction.
But to embarrass you, I do think that it's important that we get leaders in who do realise that actually telling the story innovatively is part of what they have to do, and not just be good researchers.
500%. And I think one of our great challenges that we all have not only is how do we commercially drive greater success for an incredibly talented sector, but how do we also fight the talent battle? And how do we get the brightest folk joining the workforce to join our companies and not go into the worlds of marketing and consulting that perhaps have got a bit of a better brand image? And I think it's a ongoing fight, but one that we are making progress with, and particularly as we've opened the doors to diversity and inclusion. Big kudos to the work that you've done in that department. Would love to touch on that in a bit as well. It's opening the pool to greater talent, more diverse thinking, which is critical for a sector that has to analyse behaviours of people from all walks of life. We can't be single-minded in how we do that. Great segue into some of your proudest achievements to date in driving the LMRS forward. What really sticks out to you?
Well, I was really proud of last year beating all records and not being able to stuff a single person more in the awards. I thought that proved that people did want to go ahead and shout, and there was some incredibly good work on display there. And that gives us the opportunity, funnily enough, to shout about it more directly, because to enter the award, you have to give us permission to talk about your case study. And up to then, that's been the real difficulty. I don't think up to 2011 we had any permissions to use any of that material. So how can you explain to people what good we do if you don't have the case study? So that would be one. I think that the speed with which people got behind the inclusion programme would be another. It was a bit of a personal light on the road to Damascus, in fact, to find out that people wanted MRS to do this.
Yeah.
And I've discovered that despite the shouty emails at the start of when I joined, people have a warmth to MRS. MRS has an authority, which we probably underplayed. And I don't mean that authority in the terms of waggy finger authority. I mean in terms of being able to say to government, you need to be doing this, but also to be saying to the sector, really, this is the best way of talking to people who are vulnerable.
Yeah.
And so in some cases, no, you may not do that. And I come back to what I said earlier, that no, you may not do that. It's quite useful when you may be faced with making choices that you don't want to make.
Yeah.
You can always blame us. So the inclusion thing, I think, has gone very well. And it's the volunteers that come forward and the number of people who want to volunteer and the fact that they're such wonderful people, and that you can find ways of giving them spotlights that I think is really energising.
Yeah, no, I think we're certainly blessed with an incredible group of people that call market research their careers. And thinking forward a little bit, Jane, one day, I presume, you will look for another challenge beyond the MRS. What would you love for your legacy to be with the MRS?
I would like people to start thinking that they are a collective as a sector, and to be as proud of themselves as the advertisers are, certainly the advertising agencies are, and know that they need to be recognised, and you need to work at being recognised. And then I would like to turn around and say, now as I leave, I'm looking at conference, I'm looking over a sea of faces, and it's a diverse sea of faces. Yeah. And if we could do that, I would be very, very happy.
Fantastic. Well, as we've seen from your career, there has not really been a challenge too big for you to tackle. So I've got every confidence. We're going to finish off with some quickfire questions. First one is going to be around your younger self. What do you wish you knew then that you know now?
I think I would like to know two things, or to be reassured on two things. One is, you're not alone. And people do want to help.
Yeah.
And I think that I didn't know that. And that led me in a very male world to having to be more male than possibly I was comfortable with, because that's the game I was playing. Had I known that there were people around to help and people wouldn't mind being asked, I think I'd have had fewer ulcers.
Yeah.
The second would be relating to that, network.
Yes.
Women aren't very good at that. We all think that people are too busy. But in general, back to my other comment, people like to be asked to be helped.
Yeah.
So I still don't think I'm very good at it. So lecturing other people on being good at it is probably a bit the wrong thing to do. But those would be my two greatest messages.
So interesting. The few guests we have had so far on this podcast, networking has been the number one component for both. So clearly, getting out there, getting to know people, and taking the help that they're very willing to give. And just wondering, one thing we like to look for is any career hacks that you can offer others as they develop their careers, both in the market research sector and beyond. Beyond networking, are there any hacks that you learned along the way that can really fast track and develop one's career?
I think that you need to learn to be yourself.
Yeah.
And yourself as an individual, people will notice. And that can be a number of things. It can be a skill that you particularly enjoy. It can be, and I have said this to many, many women, it can be the way you present yourself. And I think this is a story which I will tell you, which is a good lesson in why you need qualitative market research as much as anything else. And there's a lady called Madeleine Albright, who was Secretary of State, first woman, I think, in America. And she wrote a book called Read My Pins. And in this book, she reveals that she wore jewellery appropriate to the head of state she was talking to. So she got away with having feelings without having to vent her feelings. Now, some time ago, I had an issue in the BBC and I was quite sort of down about it. And my husband brought me this big brooch, which is 30s. You sometimes see me wearing it on the stage. And he said, this is your, I'm going to swear, this is your fuck off the BBC brooch. But nobody's ever going to know that you meaning that
Until
when you
now.
wear it. Until now, absolutely. And I actually think you can use something like that to bolster yourself without ever annoying anybody else until they actually know what you're meaning. But it's the same about qualitative. I said this to a bunch of bankers. I said, I will tell you how many times I've worn this brooch, on what I have worn it, and to what occasions. And when I come back, I'd like you to tell me what I mean by wearing it.
Yeah.
And they came back and said, you're telling us our data alone is not enough. And I said, quite right. That's why you need to know why all the time. And so I do think it has two messages, one individual and one for us as a sector.
Yeah. And any tips and tricks to finish us off of office life or company culture in a world now that is a lot more hybrid? Any tips that you would like to share?
I would say don't take anything for granted, because as things change, the things that used to work won't work. So do stop and take stock.
Yeah.
After you've taken stock, realise that you've always got to have fun.
Yeah.
And therefore work at having fun.
Fantastic. Jane, incredible. What a career you've had. A storytelling genius, I think it's fair to say, that is commercially driven from the early days, and a leader that achieves things. And I think in your hands, the industry is moving in a very, very positive direction. So thank you very much, and thanks for joining us today.
And thank you, because it's such a privilege to be asked to talk about oneself. You have given me a great fun morning. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jane.